everybody. My name is Christina, as mentioned. I'm the Director of Scholarships and Financial Aid at Parkside, obviously. And I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about financial aid, kind of more high overview. I'll talk about the FAFSA, some common issues that people see on the FAFSA, and then a few other more Parkside specific things. So for those who don't know, today is Financial Aid Day. Apparently it's a real holiday, so hooray, thank you for celebrating with me by coming to my presentation. So I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to talk about what financial aid is, and as you can see up here, it's really anything that a student is going to use to help them pay their education. So what most people think of when they think of financial aid is federal and state aid. So things like grants, scholarships, those sorts of things, but it's really anything that the student's going to use to help pay for their education. So here are all the things that I'm going to go over today. And I know this looks like a lot, but I'm going to, like I said, do a little high level. So it shouldn't take all that huge amount of time. So we have plenty of time for questions, comments, concerns, whatever you might have. Okay. So we're going to talk about filing the FAFSA, and we'll talk about what happens after you file the FAFSA, so that you kind of know what to expect. We'll talk about UW Parkside scholarships specifically and what you need to be doing to be in the running for any of our Parkside scholarships. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is understanding costs. And I think this is a really important part of the financial aid process that sometimes people sort of forget about because they're focused so much on applying for financial aid that they forget about thinking of things, okay, but how much is this actually going to cost me so that I know if this financial aid is enough to cover or if I need to look for other resources. Unfortunately, I won't be able to get into super specifics about what kind of financial aid is going to be available for next year because we don't typically know that until like January-ish. Sometimes we hear as early as December. With it being an election year, I really don't know what to expect. So like I said, this is going to be a little bit more high level. I can't say like these are the dollar amounts because I don't know yet. So since today is Financial Aid Day, I've included in my presentation a bunch of these bright green stars, and in the green stars is going to have fun financial aid facts because I think they're fun. I'm sure you probably don't, but I enjoy them, and I'm the one presenting, so I get to entertain myself a little bit while I go through this. So when filing the FAFSA, like I said, you can do this now. It's available in a couple ways. You can file it via paper. I wouldn't do that. It takes a lot of time, but it's still exists. Paper is still out there. Or you can go to the Studentaid.gov website, which is where the majority of people typically file their FAFSA. There is also an app. It's the My Student Aid app, which was launched last year. I've heard a lot of students who really like it, and I've heard students that said that it was tricky to do on the app. So if you do it on the app, definitely let us know because I'm curious what your experience has been like. I haven't tried it myself, so definitely let us know. If you are planning to be a freshman in the fall of 2021 or a new transfer, whatever it might be, planning to come to Parkside next fall 2021, you would want to file the 21-22 FAFSA, which is available now. It launched on October 1st. And I think that a lot of people are really intimidated about filing the FAFSA, which is understandable. It's a federal form that's a little scary. But the average completion time, I put that on there, it's only 31 minutes. When you first file it, it may take you a little bit longer, more because you're just not used to it and aren't sure what to expect. But over time, it will get easier to fill out, I promise. When I was a freshman, it took me an hour and a half, but that was via paper. It's gotten a lot better, I promise. All right. So this is the Studentaid.gov website. I wanted to show you a couple things that I put in boxes. Here's the apply for aid. This is where you would go to actually complete the FAFSA. Complete aid processes is more for things like if you want to apply for loans where you go to fill out loan applications. And then the last thing I'll point out is over here, you can change the language between English and Spanish if you need to, or if your parents are going to be assisting you and your parents need it to be in Spanish, you do have that option. And it's also that option on the FAFSA itself. So when you're in the FAFSA, you can switch between languages too. If you are going to go to apply for aid, you can also click this little login button, and that should take you right to the FAFSA. Before you file the FAFSA, you can do this step prior. It might make the end of the FAFSA a little bit easier. And this step is creating your FSA ID, or Federal Student Aid Identification. Basically, this is your electronic signature for anything federal related. So loan applications, the FAFSA, all that good stuff. This is your electronic signature. You will need it as the student, and typically one parent will need it. But the parent, if the parent is attending a school themselves, so sometimes we get it where the parent is taking courses at Gateway maybe, or even at Parkside. If they already have an FSA ID, they don't need to make a new one. Theirs already exists. A few little tips with it though. Be sure to know that it's tied to an email address. So like if your parent has an FSA ID under an email, you can't use that same email address because it's already linked to the parent's information. You'll have to use your own. And I wouldn't recommend using a high school email address since those don't last forever. If you use a high school email address and then you forget your FSA ID or you can't remember what a password was, you won't be able to reset it because your email isn't there anymore. You will need to use your legal name as it appears on your Social Security card. I have to mention that because sometimes we'll get students who have maybe gone by their middle name their whole life and don't necessarily realize that their middle name is not their first name. Sounds strange, but it happens fairly often actually, or if your last name's hyphenated, whatever it might be, you have to make sure it matches your Social Security card. And to create your FSA ID on that homepage that I showed you, Studentaid.gov, there's a little spot underneath where it says create account, and that would be where you set up your FSA ID. Once you have that set up, you'll be able to file your FAFSA. And here's what it looks like on that website. So you'll just click the little start here button, and that'll take you into the FAFSA application. If for whatever reason you go in, you file your FAFSA, you're all done, you're good to go, and you realize, oh, you know what, I forgot to put a school on, or I think I made a mistake in this one spot. You can always log back in at this spot at the bottom to make any corrections to that information. So as I mentioned before, filing of the FAFSA has begun. It started on October 1st. And again, I'm a nerd. Fun facts about the FAFSA. On October 19th, so just a couple days ago, there were already 1 million FAFSAs that were filed for next fall, which is crazy. And if you look at the numbers, it averages out to 36 FAFSAs per minute that were filed. And that like blows my mind. So nationally, there's about 20 million applications every year. So it's not too late to file, but as you can see, you are with good company. We've got a lot of applications already. In fact, Parkside got 341 applications on the first day. It's pretty cool. Here's some information that you need to file the FAFSA. You can all read. I'm not going to go into this in super detail, just going to point out the few things that are really crucial for you to know. The first thing that sometimes people get mistakes or make mistakes on is the marital status date of your parents. So you will have to put on your FAFSA what date they got married. I'm always kind of sad that students don't always know that. Definitely find out what it is. Give your parents a card. It's such a sweet thing to do, but you do need to know their marital status date for filing the FAFSA. And then the financial information that you're going to need if you're starting next fall is 2019 income information. So you'll need your 2019 tax info when you go in to file the FAFSA. But then any savings, checking, all of that from the current date, because it would be too hard for you to recreate what happened in 2019. That's why they go based off of current date. One other note that I'll make about this slide is SSNs are required for the student and for the parent. If the parent doesn't have an SSN, you would put the number 000 as the first 3 digits. The FAFSA will give you instructions as to how to do that when you're in it as well. So these are all the sections in the FAFSA. As you can see, it's really not that many. It's 6 sections total. Biographical information that they're looking for is just pretty general. The areas where people have the most trouble typically are the parent income and asset information and the student income and asset information, which makes sense because that's where you're putting all your tax info, where you're likely to have the most kind of confusion. And then the very last section is where you actually submit your FAFSA. I'm not going to go over every section because, like I said, some of these are pretty self-explanatory. What I'm going to hit most on are the areas where there's the most common confusion. and where we see the most issues that students have when they fill it out. So the common areas that we see are students wondering if they are considered dependent or not, meaning, do I have to put my parent information on the FAFSA? I'll cover that in a second. Divorce situations and who would count as the parent in those situations, and entering tax information, which makes sense. Like I said, those are tricky areas for students to cover. So dependency status, the FAFSA, when you're in that student biographical information, is going to ask you a bunch of questions to determine if you will or will not need to provide parent information. Most likely, if you are a high school student that is coming right to college after you graduate high school, you will be considered dependent on your parents, because dependent students are under the age of 24, not married, don't have children of their own that they're supporting, all of that kind of stuff. The exception would be if you as the student don't live with your parents because you're under legal guardianship. If your parents have unfortunately passed away, if you're an orphan, a ward of the court. Those are really the only exceptions. Generally, if the student's 18, 19 years old coming straight into college, they are considered dependent. There is a possibility that you can appeal this dependency status. So let's say you have a very terrible relationship with your parents, there's abuse, or any of those really horrible situations. You do have the option to appeal that, but you would want to reach out to the financial aid office directly to find out what would be required. And those appeals are very serious. So it's not like, oh, I'm mad at my mom and I left home, can I be considered independent? That's generally not enough to do it. It has to be like documented, very serious situations in your household. So more than likely, if you're coming right out of high school, you will need to provide parent info on the FAFSA. So that brings us to the next question that we get common, which is who counts as my parent? It seems like for students that have parents that are married, that may seem like a strange question, but this actually comes up pretty often. So on the FAFSA, obviously biological parents would be considered your parents, or adoptive parents if you're adopted. If the parents have never gotten married but live together and are supporting the student, both parents would still be included on the FAFSA. Same-sex couples if they're legally married. And then in divorce situations, it's really up to the family to determine who will count as the parent on the FAFSA. Generally, it's not generally, the parent who is providing the most support for the student, 50% or more, is who should be considered the parent on that form. And how you can kind of determine that, what we most often say is look at whichever parent the student lives with the majority of the time. And if that's still too hard to determine, it's 50-50 split, you could look at things like which parent is providing health insurance or car insurance, cell phone bills, things like that. And once you've kind of figured out, okay, this parent seems to be my primary parent for the purposes of the FAFSA, if that parent has remarried, you'll have to include step-parent info on the FAFSA too. Divorce situations are always really challenging from a financial aid standpoint because we can give you a lot of advice on a lot of areas, but we don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of your personal situation, where you're living, those sorts of things. So this really ends up being a judgment call of the student and the family. You can always talk to us and we'll do what we can to help guide you through it, but it's really going to end up being your kind of decision. Should say too, for divorce situations, you're not stuck listing one parent forever. So let's say when you go into college, the year before you were really living with your mom a lot, but then your dad lived closer to campus, so you moved in with him, and then the next year you include your dad. You can do that because that's your situation has changed, and that makes sense. Okay. The next area that we get a lot of confusion on, or that people seem to struggle with, is in the FAFSA, putting the tax information, so all your earnings, all that good stuff into the FAFSA. I mentioned before, you need to use your 2019 tax information, so last year, when you fill out the FAFSA for the upcoming year. And there are two ways to do it. You can enter the numbers manually, which means that you'll have to have your taxes next to you and just kind of double check as you go through. Or you can use this tool in the FAFSA called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool. And like the name says, it's just like this. It will take go into the IRS's website, pull out your tax data, and plop it into your FAFSA for you. A lot of benefit of doing this. Biggest one being that it's going to reduce any kind of issues that you might have or manual error, transposing numbers, whatever it might be. And it also speeds up your filing time because now there's questions that you don't have to answer on your own. The IRS's website does it for you. So 2 years ago, like my lovely little facto star says, about 62% of people use the data retrieval tool. We're actually seeing numbers going up in that because it is easy and takes away a lot of the work for you. There are some issues with the data retrieval tool where, depending on your tax filing status, your parents especially may not be able to use it. Like if they are married but filed separate tax returns, then it doesn't work because the system doesn't know which tax return to pull. But if you can use it, I would encourage you to use it. And if you're not sure, when you go through the website, it'll tell you if you qualify to use it or not. This is what it looks like. I put a lot of screenshots in here just so that you guys know what to expect. But if you do decide to use the IRS data retrieval tool, you'll get to this screen where you would enter some of your information, and then you would hit this little submit button, and then it'll tell you what it's pulling in out of your taxes to put into the FAFSA. It doesn't give you numbers, but it tells you what fields it's pulling from. And you just hit this little transfer now button to pull it into your FAFSA. So it's pretty quick. And like I said, it takes a significant amount of time out of your actual need to fill out the FAFSA. So those are the two big areas: is dependency status, who my parent, I guess 3 areas: dependency status, who is my parent, and then the tax info part. I really encourage you, like I said, to use the data retrieval tool if you can, because it will make your life a lot easier. Even if you use the data retrieval tool, there are some other fields that you'll have to read through about other assets that you might have, like do you own vacation properties, things like that. But generally there's little notes next to it that explains where you can find that information. More often than not, if you're like, I don't think this is me, then it's not you, and you can leave it as a 0 and move on. Once you're through all that good stuff, you get to this last page where you will sign and submit the FAFSA. And like I mentioned before, the student will have to sign it, and one parent will have to sign it using their FSA ID. We have had some families that have had issues with the FSA ID linking in the signature page. It's rare, but it happens. If that does happen, you can print a signature page and mail that off to the Department of Education. It doesn't slow it down a ton, so it's not a bad option to do, and at least then your FAFSA is on file. So that is about the common questions and stuff about the FAFSA. I will take a pause for the cause. And Brittany, how are we looking? Any questions, or are we good?
No questions that I see. We'll check right now.
Okay, thanks.
None. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to leave them in the chat, or you can come off of mute.
Okay, well, then I'll keep it rolling. So once you've filed the FAFSA, hooray, you've got in my opinion, one of the harder parts done. I don't personally think it's hard, but I think it's intimidating. You have that part out of your way, you're good to go. So what's going to happen next? So within about 3 to 5 days, we normally say up to a week, the FAFSA information will be sent to every school that you list on the FAFSA. So you put Parkside on it, within about 3 to 5 days, we will receive that information and we can kind of start to take a look at it. The big thing to keep in mind though with this is, have you already been admitted to the school? Because what happens is, if you haven't been admitted, we'll still receive the FAFSA information, but it doesn't have any student information to link up to. So although we'll have it, we can't really send you any notices saying, here's what you qualify for, or here's some questions we have, anything like that. So be sure to, once you file your FAFSA, don't panic if you don't hear anything right away from all the schools if you haven't been admitted to those schools yet. That's not uncommon. First batches of like student notifications of here's what you qualify for, or here's information that we need, those typically don't start going out until between December and March. I know I'm giving you a really wide time frame, but like I mentioned earlier in the call, with it being an election year, I honestly have no idea what to expect in terms of when we'll know what certain amounts are, like the federal Pell Grant. I need to know from the Department of Education, which is, affected by the election. So it may be a little bit more delayed than normal this year. We typically aim to have them out in January. But, be patient if it's not right away in January, because when it's an election year, it's kind of all over the place in terms of when we can get those out. March is generally our latest time frame that we would send out those notices. So notifications, different types that would go out to you. The first is what we call a missing information notice, which basically means that, hey, we got your FAFSA, we took a look at it, and either we have some questions about information or the Department of Education has told us that we have to ask you these things. Most commonly, it's that you're picked for a process called verification, where we have to compare tax info to what you put on the FAFSA. Real big perk of using that data retrieval tool is that we don't have to ask for hardly anything from you. It's basically just a worksheet and you're good to go. So another perk of using that data retrieval tool is that it will save you a little bit of time. But other things we might ask for might be citizenship confirmation, or maybe when we looked at the FAFSA, we thought, oh, this number seems a little strange. So we might ask for confirmation of a specific number. So that's the first type of notification that you could get. If we don't need anything from you, though, what you'll receive is your financial aid offer or financial aid eligibility notification, whatever you want to call it, award letter. Everyone calls it something different. And that letter would include all the different kinds of federal and state aid that you may qualify for. So that's kind of the happy letter that everyone looks forward to getting. Like, how much money am I going to get? That letter may include information about some UWP scholarships, depending on where you come from in either the state of Wisconsin or Illinois. If you're from Illinois or another state, more than likely it will show what any kind of scholarship you have. If you're from Wisconsin, it may or it may not, depending on the time of the year. I'm going to explain that more in just a second. My fun fact in here is that $122 billion in federal aid is processed annually, which is insane. Our portion of that is a lot smaller because we're a smaller school, obviously, but there's a huge amount of money that's available to students. So definitely fill out your FAFSA so that we can help you out and let you know what you qualify for. So as I mentioned before, the UW Parkside Scholarships, how you get in the pool to being considered for UW Parkside Scholarships. The biggest is that you have to be admitted, so not applied, but actually admitted, all done with everything that you need to submit by February 1st of each year. So if you are planning to start next fall, you would need to be admitted by February 1st of 2021. Be sure to have all that stuff done. Once you've been admitted, and the February 1st date has come up, we'll run to see who all meets the qualifications of that group, and an email will go out to those students saying, we're inviting you to apply for UW Parkside Scholarships, which will have a separate little application that you'll have to fill out. It's brief, I promise. It's not hard. Once that's all done and we've compiled all that information, those scholarship applications are evaluated by a committee of a person from our office and then people from the admissions office who are familiar with you all and your cases and your history and all that good stuff. So like I said, be admitted by February 1st so you can be in this pool. And then we send out notifications to students saying, here's what you qualify for, typically in April. The timing of when that will be in April really depends on how the year is going. This year was a bit crazy because of the pandemic, but it's typically in April. So we'll stick with that. And once you're already at Parkside, these scholarships are still available for you as well. So actually right now, our scholarship application is open for students who are currently attending Parkside. So you can qualify for them as a new student. And then once you are attending Parkside, you can apply again and continue throughout your time at Parkside. This past year, we awarded $535,737 in these scholarships. Nice round number, I know, which is the highest that I've ever seen in my time here. We have a really great team of people doing a lot of awesome fundraising to help support students. So there's a lot of money out there available for you. Definitely be admitted by February 1st so that you can get your hands on that pot too. And the last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about today, as I mentioned before, is understanding your costs. So there's always a lot of emphasis on filling out the FAFSA and qualifying for as much financial aid as you can. Obviously, very important, but it's also really important for you to have a good idea and expectation for what your costs are going to look like when you come to Parkside so that you're prepared for what it's going to be, and so that you know, okay, here's what my financial aid is. How does that compare to what my anticipated costs are? So I have in here the link to our cost calculator. It's a tool on our website that we have for you where you can put in, you fill out these fields here, very basic fields that will give you an estimate of what your cost will look like. So you can say, do I want for the full year, or do I just want to look at what a semester would be? You can pick where you're from. So Wisconsin, not Wisconsin, or Minnesota. You can choose if you plan to live on campus or not and what that housing option would look like, meal plans, if you plan to have a car on campus, and if you're going to be a new student, you would have to say yes to the new student fee. And then once you hit the little calculate button, boop, it spits out what your cost might be. This is really helpful for students, especially for students who are within a commuting distance that aren't sure if they can afford to live on campus or not, or they just want to get an idea about if that's going to be feasible. This can really help you make more informed decisions about what is going to be feasible for you, or what options you have. So definitely check this out. It'll really help prepare you for what to expect when you come to school. And it'll also be a really great way for you to compare with your financial aid offer when those go out, to know where you're going to be. Is this affordable? Do I need to take out loans? Do I not? All that good stuff. So check it out. We just got it out there this year. I think it's been really helpful for students. If you have questions about it, let us know. But great tool available for you to make sure that you have all the information that you need to make good financial decisions when you come to Parkside. And those are really all the points that I had today. They asked me to try to keep this to like a half hour so that I didn't talk all your ears off. I know we all have computer burnout right now. So my last fun fact in my presentation is this is a beautiful tree on campus that's like right outside my office. And your fun fact is that this is the most tweeted tree on Parkside's campus, which is pretty cool. Did you know that, Brittany? Someone told me that the other year and I was so excited.
Yeah. Recently, someone's like, yeah, this is the most photographed tree. I just
Yes.
found it like a week ago. So, yeah.
It is beautiful. So I get why it's the most tweeted tree. So, yeah.